Hi, I'm Gareth Spence and welcome to Tech Talk. At this year's Fiber Connect, broadband policy is a hot topic. To provide some insight into what's being discussed both here and on the Hill in Washington, I'm joined by Paul Breakman. Paul, what is the current state of broadband in America?
We are inching closer to universal coverage than ever, but there's still work to do. There is some sunlight between those gaps, and if you take the coverage, what we know, about 6% of Americans lack access to what's 25/3 internet speeds, FCC's definition for broadband. If you up that to, let's say, 100/20, which is the new FCC's benchmark, it brings us closer to about 9%, 9% who lack broadband in America. And 30% of rural Americans lack access to broadband. The bigger issue, really, Gareth, is not only access, but in rural America in particular, you're getting a lot less take rates. Subscribers that don't necessarily trust the federal government. They don't have digital literacy skills to know what they need, and they don't have access to affordable broadband, which is a big piece of this. When we talk about broadband, I always like to think about the affordability piece, not just the access, but affordability. And over the last 4 years, we've seen about $100 billion in federal programs come out of Washington between BEAD funding, ARPA, Reconnect. It's about $100 billion. The issue we're facing right now is the holdup primarily of the BEAD funding, the $42.5 billion in BEAD funds, and what's the future of that federal program. So that's a real issue.
How can these challenges be overcome?
The challenges can be overcome by effective advocacy in Washington, effective advocacy at the state houses, and making sure we're speaking with a unified voice. We do it from Adtran does it from the perspective of working closely with the Fiber Broadband Association and having that unified voice, and making sure we have a seat at the table. And we work with our customers to make sure they're engaged on the local level, at the county level, at the state level, and then in Washington, we work closely with organizations like the Fiber Broadband Association to make that happen.
What are the key policy challenges that need to be addressed?
So first and foremost, we need some certainty on the BEAD funding. So there is currently a 90-day pause. The NTIA has paused the BEAD new program guidelines for 90 days. We are waiting for what that new guidance is going to look like. And we assume that we won't see any new guidelines until probably early midsummer at this point. And what that does, it pushes out all of the state's timelines. And it really just complicates the process. There was a very specific process of how these dollars were going to flow through the states. And what we're seeing now is a rejiggering of the program, if you will. And that's sort of using that term nicely. But I would expect not a clawback of the money, but a different appreciation, a more tech-neutral stance coming out of Washington. You're seeing low Earth orbit satellites having a real sort of place at the table, seat at the table. You're going to see some fixed wireless solutions have a place at the table. And what that means is less dollars for fiber, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. So I really believe that if you can find the right set of technology solutions that work for a community or a provider, then all of the ships, when the tide comes in, the ships will all rise. And that means faster deployment and faster shovels in the ground, faster deployment, and faster internet to the folks at the end of the line. So,
you mentioned policy work earlier. How active is Adtran in this policy work?
So we're doing more and more at the state level, at the federal level. We are constantly in meetings on the Hill with congressional staff. We are constantly meeting with the FCC. We are constantly meeting with the Department of Commerce, NTIA. It is more important than ever that we are not only at the table, but part of that discussion. And we do that, as I mentioned earlier, through our work with the FBA, but also our independent work. I like to say, if you're not part of the conversation, if I'm not there talking about what Adtran's doing, talking about what our customers are doing, talking about the future of broadband and what we think it should be, what it should look like, then our voice will not be heard, and policy positions will be made without us having any input at all.
Looking ahead, what policy developments should we be looking out for, and what is Adtran doing to plan for the future?
So first and foremost, BEAD. We need to make sure that all of the work the states have done up to this point is not for naught, right? And the states have put in a lot of effort to finalize their programs. And we're now at a point where a number of states are going to, with new guidance coming, states are going to be pushed out a number of months. So what was, in my view, probably, we were looking originally at 2025, worst case scenario. I think best case scenario, we're looking at 2026. Shovels in the ground, maybe middle of 2026. The challenge we see is that there has been a lot of work put forth to make sure the money goes to the right places. And mapping continues to be an issue. The FCC's mapping continues to be an issue. Part of the work that we do on the policy side is I mentioned the federal dollar funding, and the state programs too, but how we define those locations, right? So how the FCC defines a need. And the FCC maps, if you have one piece of a service territory that's defined as unserved, and the FCC maps show that as in fact unserved, it will impact where the dollars actually go. And and there's going to be challenges, and that's going to slow down the money. And those policy pieces are, I spend every waking hour worrying about those kinds of things. And take that, and then you add on things like environmental permitting and pole attachment issues, and it's going to slow down deployment significantly. There is some light, and I want to tell you this. I mentioned it earlier that there are a significant amount of dollars on the private investment side flowing to broadband. So as the federal dollars take a pause or take sort of a slowing down in getting out the door, we are seeing a lot of money on the private equity side. And so I think last year the CapEx dollars just for broadband projects were it's like $95 billion. A number of infrastructure funds are investing billions of dollars in regional fiber projects. And I see that as a huge opportunity. So if you could take private equity dollar and increase that with federal dollars, I think that's where really the rubber meets the road. And so there is some light at the end of the tunnel, for sure.
What advice would you give to service providers and other stakeholders navigating this complex landscape?
So if you look around, look behind us. This is a technology show. But what I know is that policy leads and technology follows. And so if you're not engaged with your county officials and your local politicians and your state houses, and on the federal level, your congressional offices, your voice will not be heard. You will get left behind. I can't overstate the impact of just advocacy at every level. I love technology. We are a technology company, but policy sets the roadmap to where we're headed.
Before we wrap up, what is your vision for broadband in America?
So I joined Adtran from the rural electric co-op side of the business, and very mission driven. I remain mission driven. My view is where somebody in, let's say, rural Montana is going to have the same access to a high-speed, robust broadband connection as somebody in downtown Manhattan, right? And you're talking about access to telehealth and remote work and big data and everything that comes in between. And I see that we, from Adtran's perspective, a technology solutions provider, can lead the way. I love being on the right side of history. Feels good. I came here to do what we're doing here, and that's sort of my vision, Gareth.
Paul, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.